Assassin's Creed has one of the most iconic boss rosters in gaming history, but the gap between the first fight and the last is so massive it's almost a different game entirely. Today we're breaking down the hardest bosses across the entire franchise, from the one that started it all to the ones that had players genuinely questioning their life choices. Starting with the fight that set the template for everything that came after, Al Mualim. Here's the thing about Al Mualim. The hardest part of this fight has nothing to do with his moveset. By the time you reach the end of the original Assassin's Creed, you've assassinated 9 targets across the Holy Land. You've earned your rank back. You've done everything your mentor asked. And then you walk into Masyaf, and every single assassin in the fortress tries to kill you because Al Mualim has been using an apple of Eden to puppeteer the Brotherhood's free will. The man who trained you, guided you, and handed you your targets one by one has been controlling everything, including you. That betrayal is the real boss fight. The combat is almost secondary. Before you even reach Al Mualim, you cut through corrupted assassins operating under his direct mental influence. These aren't strangers. These are your brothers. When you finally face him in the garden, Malik arrives with reinforcements, one of the only times in the entire franchise that a final boss fight includes meaningful allied support. It never really happens again, which is either a design oversight or the developers knowing they'd never top it emotionally. The actual combat tests one thing, whether you learned to counter and block properly. Al Mualim uses illusions to clone himself, forces you to identify the real one, and teleports around the arena when he takes damage. Disorienting the first time, genuinely clever as a design choice, and not particularly brutal by any modern standard. By current franchise standards, Al Mualim is the most accessible fight on this list. He earns his spot here not because he'll end your run, but because he established what every Assassin's Creed boss was supposed to be. A story moment first, a mechanical challenge second. Everything on this list builds on that template. Some of it builds very, very high. The next fight trades one-on-one philosophy for something significantly more chaotic, because the Storm Fortress doesn't believe in fair fights. The Storm Fortress. Most boss fights in this franchise ask you to learn a pattern. The Storm Fortress doesn't care about patterns. It just wants you dead, and it has brought enough firepower to make that happen several times over before you figure out what you're even supposed to do. This thing is enormous. We're talking a legendary naval vessel, so heavily armored and so loaded with cannons that it basically functions as a floating weapons platform someone accidentally taught to sail. The mortar weapons track your trajectory, the broadside cannons hit like a freight train, and the armor reinforcement is so absurd that getting caught in the wrong position isn't a mistake you survive. You just stop existing, which is, not ideal. Here's the thing about the Storm Fortress that breaks people's brains the first time they encounter it. Despite being the size of a small island, it moves like a ship half its size. You expect something this massive to lumber around and give you room to breathe. Turns out no. It commits to that expectation for about 4 seconds, and then starts maneuvering like it has somewhere to be. The only viable approach vectors are from the front or the rear, where the armor is thinner and the cannon coverage drops. Getting caught on the broadside is essentially instant death, so you spend the entire fight trying to thread a needle against a vessel that keeps spinning to deny you exactly that. It's less of a boss fight and more of a geometry problem that shoots back. But here's where it gets genuinely unfair. Once you've ground the Storm Fortress down to critical health, it summons 2 additional legendary class ships, the Argonaut and the Scepter. What was already a brutal one-on-one becomes a 3-front battle against fully ranked up vessels, while you're already damaged, low on resources, and operating on fraying nerves. The community response to this moment is mostly unprintable. The Storm Fortress is simultaneously a skill check and an equipment check, and it doesn't care which one kills you. Show up without fully upgraded ship components, and you won't live long enough to learn anything. The fight has earned a specific reputation in the rogue community as the exact moment naval combat stops being enjoyable and starts feeling like punishment. That's not just frustration talking, that's a widely documented consensus from people who came back multiple times and eventually won, which means they earned the right to have opinions about it, respect where respect is due. But if you think managing 3 legendary ships at once is chaotic, wait until you meet El Impoluto, who decided that the entire concept of staying still was personally offensive. El Impoluto. El Impoluto is a ship that has absolutely no business doing what it does. None. Zero. The name translates to the pristine in English, which sounds almost polite for something that has ruined so many playthroughs. It sits in the upper left corner of the game world, out in the Dry Tortuga region, waiting. And the moment you engage it, your entire understanding of Black Flag's naval combat gets thrown overboard. Here's the thing. Every legendary ship in Black Flag teaches you to respect firepower. You learn to angle your hull, manage your distance, trade broadsides, brace when you have to. That's the language the game spends dozens of hours teaching you. El Impoluto doesn't speak that language, it rams you. That's its whole thing. This massive heavyweight vessel, a ship that should handle like a floating warehouse, moves like something that put every stat point into cardio. It circles, accelerates, changes direction faster than your brain can process, and then hits you like a freight train with a nautical degree. The contradiction is genuinely maddening. A ship this size has no mechanical right to move that fast. But that contradiction is exactly what makes it the most notorious of the 5 legendary ships. Every other fight in Black Flag rewards patience and positioning. El Impoluto punishes both. Players consistently report needing 5 or more attempts before they even understand what's happening. The first few runs aren't really fights. They're tutorials in how badly you've misread the encounter. You're lining up a broadside like the game trained you to do, and El Impoluto is already behind you, mid-ram, completely indifferent to your strategy. The breakthrough when it comes is deeply counterintuitive. You have to ram it back, not defensively, deliberately. You accelerate into El Impoluto before impact, brace, and let the collision happen on your terms. Doing this deals significantly more damage than passive play. The game is rewarding aggression in a fight that looks for all the world like a pure evasion puzzle. Every instinct says survive, evade, outlast. The correct answer is charge directly at the thing trying to kill you. That's a hard lesson when your ship is on fire. Once it clicks, the fight transforms. You're predicting its circular movement pattern, timing your acceleration, turning a nightmare into something almost manageable. Almost. One mistimed brace can still end a run you thought you had under control. El Impoluto earns its reputation through a fundamental mismatch between what the game trained you to do and what the fight actually demands. That gap between expectation and reality is what keeps players coming back for another attempt. And if you thought being outmaneuvered by a ship was bad, wait until the next entry takes away the ship entirely and just turns you to stone. Medusa. She wasn't always a monster. That's the part that makes this fight hit differently than everything else on this list. In Assassin's Creed Odyssey, Medusa was a human woman, transformed by an Isu artifact called the Prize of the Medusa, and forced to serve as its guardian ever since. The lore behind her is genuinely tragic, and then the game makes you kill her across 3 increasingly chaotic phases that will absolutely ruin your evening. Here's the thing about Medusa. She's the moment Odyssey stops pretending to be a historical action game and fully commits to mythological horror. The visual design alone signals the shift: snake hair, hovering movement, a gaze that literally turns you to stone. But the spectacle is backed up by mechanics that are brutally unforgiving even if you've overleveled the fight. Phase 1 introduces the Petrification Ray, circular energy projections, and melee attacks with reach that looks wrong until it hits you 5 times and you start respecting the range. The pillars scattered around the arena are not decoration. They are your entire survival strategy. Breaking line of sight against those pillars is the primary counter to the petrification beam, and players who try to dodge the ray outright will discover very quickly that it tracks harder than it looks. Before long, you develop a kind of anxious relationship with those pillars. Very normal emotional bond to have with architecture. Phase 2 adds summoned warrior minions, and that's where Medusa earns her reputation. Suddenly you're managing 2 completely different threat levels at once. A hovering Gorgon, firing a stone beam at your face, while soldiers hack at your back. The temptation is to focus down the minions first. That's usually the wrong call. You have to keep moving, keep the pillars between you and Medusa, and clean up the warriors in short, efficient bursts without ever letting the beam get a clean angle on you. Phase 3 is 6 simultaneous circular projections plus mass warrior summons. 6 at the same time. The arena that felt manageable in Phase 1 starts feeling extremely small in Phase 3, and the pillars you've relied on for cover are now also obstacles to your escape routes. The escalation is genuinely well designed, each phase building on the last rather than just padding health or inflating damage, but the reward for that design is Phase 3 being organized chaos with a petrification beam pointed directly at your face. What the community keeps coming back to is that grinding does not fix this fight. You can be 10 levels over the recommended threshold on nightmare difficulty and still get punished for sloppy positioning. Mechanical skill is the only currency that matters here. No gear loadout replaces understanding the pillars. No ability spam replaces proper phase management. The community consensus on Medusa is that she's the benchmark. Spectacular presentation, lore that rewards you for caring about the story, and difficulty that feels earned rather than arbitrary. She was a person once. The game makes sure you feel that. and then it makes you fight for your life anyway. If you think Medusa is rough, wait until you meet the god who runs the afterlife. Medusa fights in 3 phases. Hades fights in 3 phases. On paper, they sound like the same encounter with a different coat of paint, but where Medusa's phases add bodies to the arena, Hades' phases add mechanics that stack on top of everything already trying to kill you. That distinction is everything. Hades, the god of death, is the final boss of the Fate of Atlantis DLC, and the first thing he does when the fight starts is make you think you're broken. Here's what happens. You hit him. The damage lands. His health bar doesn't move. You hit him again. Still nothing. A lot of players at this point assume they've triggered some kind of cutscene glitch, or that they're fighting a segment that's supposed to be lost. Turns out no. Hades opens phase 1 with a full energy shield layered over his actual health, meaning every single hit you land is depleting the shield rather than touching him. The fight isn't unkillable. It just looks exactly like it is until the moment the shield finally drops and everything suddenly makes sense. Once you get past that realization, the real fight starts, and it's immediately uncomfortable. His staff attacks reach further than they have any right to. If you back off to what feels like a safe distance, the slash still connects. The dash that follows it still connects. The game's visual language tells you that you're clear, and then you take full damage anyway, which is the kind of thing that makes a person briefly question their own perception of space. His orbs compound this problem by functioning as floating laser projectors that add continuous ranged pressure while he's simultaneously closing distance in melee. You're not dealing with a boss who switches between ranged and melee. You're dealing with both at once, constantly. Phase 2 removes exactly 0 of that. Everything from Phase 1 stays active, and Hades introduces additional ranged attacks on top of it. Phase 3 does the same thing. The fight never simplifies, it only accumulates. By the time you're in the final phase, you're managing the shield memory, the extended melee range, the orb lasers, and a ranged attack toolkit that keeps expanding, all simultaneously. This is what the community keeps coming back to when they talk about Hades. Most boss encounters in this franchise operate on a replacement model. Phase 2 swaps out Phase 1's attacks for a new set. You learn a pattern, the pattern changes, you learn the new one. Hades operates on an addition model. Nothing gets replaced. The threat library only grows. That forces a completely different cognitive load on the player because you never get to forget anything. Every other god-tier boss in Odyssey has a ceiling on complexity. Hades does not. If you think 3-phase escalation is brutal, wait until the next entry, because the Erymanthian Boar throws the entire rulebook out and replaces it with a gas cloud that just doesn't go away. Erymanthian Boar. Every boss on this list is hard in a way you can respect. You die, you figure out the pattern, you adapt, you win. That's the deal. The Erymanthian Boar breaks the deal. Greek mythology describes this creature as shaggy and wild, tameless, a beast of vast weight with foaming jaws, which is great. Sounds terrifying. Assassin's Creed Odyssey took that description and said, sure, but what if it also just constantly farted poison gas everywhere? Because that's the fight. That's the whole fight. Here's how it works. The boar emits a continuous stream of poisonous gas that doesn't disappear. It accumulates. It sits on the arena floor, and it stays there while the boar keeps moving and keeps emitting more of it, so the safe zones in the arena shrink as the fight progresses. You're not fighting a boar. You're fighting a boar while the floor slowly becomes uninhabitable. The boar also has abnormally high health and hits hard in direct melee, so you can't just rush it down before the gas becomes a problem. The attrition strategy that works on basically every other legendary encounter in the game simply doesn't apply here, because time is actively working against you. But here's where it gets really funny. The most widely documented solution, the one plastered across every guide, every forum thread, every community resource for this fight, is to deliberately trigger a bounty and let the hunters enter the arena. Not because this unlocks some special mechanic, not because it's a clever intended interaction, but because the boar will redirect its aggression onto the hunters, giving you breathing room to deal damage without drowning in gas. You are outsourcing the boss fight to NPCs who wandered in from the road. That strategy is so normalized at this point that a significant portion of the player base genuinely assumes it's the intended approach, which is either the best accidental game design in Odyssey, or a quiet admission that the encounter is broken. Probably the second one. Every other boss on this list is hard, because the developers designed a good fight and made it punishing. The Erymanthian Boar is hard because the developers created an arena that poisons itself, attached a damage sponge to it, and called it a day. The community knows it, the guides know it, nobody's pretending otherwise. It earned its reputation, just not in the way any developer would want. The Erymanthian Boar isn't the hardest boss on this list. It might not even be the most mechanically demanding, but it is the one that makes you feel like you're fighting the design document instead of the actual enemy, which is a special kind of frustrating that sticks with you. At least the boar stays in one dimension. Balor, up next, will try to blind you from multiple of them. Balor. In Irish mythology, Balor of the Evil Eye was the king of the Fomorians, and his defining trait was exactly what it sounds like. His eye killed people. Not metaphorically, not in a he gave someone a bad look kind of way. Anyone caught in his gaze was simply destroyed. The eye was so dangerous it had to be kept shut, held closed by a massive iron lid that required 4 men to lift. That's the entire mythology. A king so dangerous that looking at him was the last thing you ever did. Wrath of the Druids takes that premise completely seriously, and the result is one of the better boss encounters in the entire Valhalla family. Here's how it works. Phase 1 is pattern recognition under pressure. Balor has a spinning attack that requires 2 consecutive dodges, one for the initial strike and one for the follow-up dash. And if you think a single dodge clears you, you're wrong. The white ring is the one that ends runs. It appears beneath you, it's instant death if you're still standing in it, and early attempts usually feature at least one moment where you registered the ring too late and suddenly you're back at the start wondering what happened. He also mixes in a sword smash and the eye beam, that being the literal instant death ray fired straight from the mythology, a light attack that punishes anyone trying to sit at range and chip damage their way through the fight. The lesson Phase 1 teaches you, whether you want to learn it or not, is that passive play gets you killed. Phase 2 is where everything flips. Balor has 3 weak points: right elbow, left knee, and back. You've been spending Phase 1 surviving him. Phase 2 is when you start hunting him. Depleting those weak points fills his stamina gauge completely, which changes the entire rhythm of the encounter. You stop being reactive and start being deliberate. The fight transforms from a chaos test into a targeting exercise under pressure, and that shift is genuinely satisfying when it clicks, because the first time you consciously seek out his elbow while dodging an eye beam, you realize the encounter was designed to be learned, not endured. It has a logic to it, a structure. Most players find that the fight that felt overwhelming on attempt 1 feels almost controlled by attempt 5. That's the thing about Balor that separates him from some of the other fights on this list. He's the hardest boss in Wrath of the Druids, but he's hard in a way that gets easier every attempt. Players who approach him like a puzzle find the fight opens up considerably. Players who approach him like a brawl get deleted by the white ring 5 times in a row and write angry posts about it. He rewards the people who paid attention. Community reception has been largely positive precisely because of this. Balor is punishing when you misread him and completely manageable when you don't, which is exactly how a mythological king whose entire deal is annihilating sight should feel. The lore earns the mechanics. The mechanics earn the lore. He's a fair fight. After some of the entries on this list, that actually means something, but if Balor is the hardest boss in one DLC, Steinbjorn is in a different category entirely, and the difference is not subtle. Steinbjorn. Most legendary bosses in Assassin's Creed have a trick to them, a phase transition, a pattern to crack, a weak point that unlocks once you've figured out the puzzle. Steinbjorn doesn't have a trick. Steinbjorn is just a bear that will not die. Found in Jotunheim, Steinbjorn is a legendary ice bear, and the first thing most players notice when they walk into this fight is that nothing they do seems to matter. Your landing hits, you can see the animations connecting, but the health bar is barely moving, and you're already getting punched across a frozen tundra by something that weighs approximately the same as a small building. It genuinely feels like the game is broken. It isn't. The health pool is just that large. Here's what makes this fight interesting though, and I use the word interesting loosely. The moveset is actually pretty simple compared to other legendary encounters on this list. There's no complex phase structure, no rotating patterns that require memorization, no trick that suddenly makes everything click. Steinbjorn hits you hard, repeatedly, and because the attacks are fast and the recovery windows are short, there's no room to settle into a rhythm. The simplicity is exactly what makes it dangerous. You can't outsmart it, you just have to survive it. Fire is the answer. Specifically, fire weapons and fire-based abilities are the difference between a fight that lasts a punishing 8 minutes and one that lasts considerably longer and ends with you staring at a loading screen. Players who arrive without fire builds find out the hard way that Steinbjorn's health pool combined with standard melee damage output creates a battle of attrition that the bear wins every single time. Not through any particular unfairness, just through the math of how long you can actually stay alive without meaningfully reducing its health. The focus of the Nornir ability is the other essential piece. It slows time, which sounds nice in general, but here it's specifically required for targeting Steinbjorn's weak points. the legs and the rear. Those are the locations where damage is maximized. Without the time slow, landing consistent hits on those spots while a furious ice bear is actively trying to rearrange your skeleton is mostly guesswork. With it, you can actually execute the strategy deliberately instead of hoping the back end of a bear happens to wander into your attack animation. But here's where the community element becomes its own thing entirely. Steinbjorn no damage completion videos exist, and within the Valhalla player base, they carry genuine weight. Not the casual appreciation you'd give a speedrun or a challenge playthrough. These videos are treated as meaningful demonstrations of preparation and mastery, shared in the way people used to share raid kills or boss clear times. Players openly acknowledge in the comments that they cannot replicate what they're watching. The fight takes roughly 8 minutes, even for a fully prepared player executing everything correctly. No damage requires executing everything correctly for 8 straight minutes against an opponent whose attacks hit for enough damage that one mistake is often close to a death sentence. That's not a puzzle boss. That's an endurance test dressed up as a bear, and the community built an entire appreciation culture around watching people pass it. Next up is Javi, and if you thought a bear with a health bar the size of a highway was rough, wait until you're fighting a god who can rewrite the rules of the encounter mid-fight, Heavy. Here's something that hits differently about this fight. Every boss on this list has been an external threat, something to track down, something to destroy, something to outlast. Hell is none of those things. Hell is the end of the line. Let me explain. Throughout Valhalla, Eivor's entire identity is tangled up with Odin. The visions, the mythological undertow, pulling at every major story beat, the creeping sense that Eivor isn't just channeling a god, but actually carrying one around inside them. The Forgotten Saga takes that thread and drives it to its conclusion. When you finally stand across from Hel, you are not fighting some wandering threat you stumbled into. You are fighting the ruler of the Norse realm of the dead, in her own domain on her terms, after she has already watched you fail, and restart more times than you probably want to admit. That framing matters, because it's the reason losing this fight feels different from losing any other fight in the game. It's not frustrating, it's almost appropriate, but here's where it gets mechanical, because Hel does not care about your feelings. The fight is a deliberate capstone for everything the Forgotten Saga has been teaching you. Every combat system the DLC introduced, every pattern you learn to read, every cooldown you learn to respect rather than spam, all of it gets called in at once. Hel layers elemental and spectral abilities over physical assault patterns that escalate across multiple phases. The first phase is already demanding. By the later phases, you are managing several separate problems simultaneously, and failing any one of them typically ends the run entirely. The damage output is extreme, but here's the thing about Hel that separates her from something like the Erymanthian Boar. The difficulty is earned. Every hit that kills you was telegraphed. Every failed dodge was your mistake. The fight is internally consistent in a way that makes each death feel instructive rather than arbitrary, which is either a credit to the design or cold comfort depending on how many attempts you're on. Ability cooldown management is not optional here. It is the fight. Players who treat their abilities as panic buttons last about as long as you would expect. The encounter demands you deploy cooldowns with timing and purpose rather than burning them the moment the meter fills. Combined with positioning requirements and reading Hel's escalating attack patterns, you are being asked to do several skilled things at once, continuously without breaks. Hel does not give you time to breathe between phases. The abilities shift their behavior as the fight progresses, punishing players who assume Phase 2 works like Phase 1. It does not. Players have documented the specific shifts in timing across phases, and the consensus is that the transition moments are where most runs end, right when you think you have a read on the fight, and Hel decides you do not. What elevates this beyond a purely mechanical gauntlet is the thematic weight underneath every exchange. You are supposed to struggle here. Fighting the goddess of death in the realm of the dead, as a god trying to cheat that exact fate, is not supposed to feel comfortable. The difficulty was never meant to be arbitrary. Hel's reputation sits firmly in the earned category, and that distinction matters on a list like this. Not cheap, not unfair, just genuinely, relentlessly hard in a way that rewards the players willing to learn it. Because Fenrir is waiting, and Fenrir is not a philosophical puzzle. Fenrir is just the end of everything. Fenrir. In Norse mythology, Fenrir is not just a monster, he is the end of everything. He is the creature that kills Odin at Ragnarok. The wolf so powerful and so unstoppable that the gods spent centuries trying to bind him before finally accepting that nothing they did would matter. The world ends. Fenrir is why. Assassin's Creed. Valhalla put you in that fight, and the first time most people walked into that arena, they got absolutely destroyed. Here's why Fenrir hits so differently from everything else on this list. Every previous entry, whether it was Medusa's petrification, Balor's eye beam, or Steinbjorn's ice shockwaves gave you something recognizable to adapt to. A pattern, a tell, a rhythm. Fenrir has all of those things technically. He has learnable attacks. He follows rules. The fight is completely fair. It just doesn't feel that way for the first 20 minutes, because nothing in the entire game prepares you for the scale of what he does with those rules. His melee attacks cover distances that should not be possible. You see him wind up from what looks like a safe distance, you start your dodge, and the attack arrives instantly. Not fast, instantly. The gap between initiation and impact is so small that reactions developed across 60 or 70 hours of Valhalla combat do not transfer. Players who were confident in their parry timing, their dodge windows, their spacing instincts, all of it gets dismantled in the opening 30 seconds. The muscle memory that carried you through the entire game is exactly wrong here, and the damage values are brutal. Miscounting dodges by even one does not just hurt you. It can end the attempt entirely if your resources are thin, which brings you to the mushrooms. Sustained healing through mushroom consumption is the resource management backbone of the entire Fenrir encounter. This is not an exaggeration or a quirk of strategy. Players who enter without adequate mushroom supplies cannot win. Not will struggle. Cannot win. The fight demands healing across an extended endurance window, and if you hit that window dry, the math simply does not work in your favor. Which means a significant number of first-time encounters with Fenrir ended, not because of skill failure, but because nobody told you this was coming, and you consumed your supplies on the approach. That's the thing the community universally agrees on. The first time you fight Fenrir, it feels unbeatable. Not frustrating, unfair, unbeatable, not cheap mechanics unbeatable, genuinely, honestly unbeatable, in the way that makes you quietly wonder if the difficulty settings are working correctly. The arrow strategy is the solution that eventually clicks. Targeting Fenrir's kneecaps with sustained ranged fire while maintaining extreme positional discipline, healing constantly, forcing yourself not to panic dodge into his attacks. It's methodical, it's slow, it asks you to stay calm while an apocalyptic wolf is trying to eat you, which is a significant ask. And here's why Fenrir ends up as the franchise's consensus pick for most satisfying difficult boss rather than just most punishing. Every piece of difficulty in this fight is appropriate. The scale of the fight is appropriate because this is Fenrir. The wolf that ends the world should feel like he ends the world. The range on his attacks should feel impossible because he is an impossible creature. The resource management pressure should feel desperate because you are one person binding a god. When you win, it does not feel like beating a video game boss. Players describe the victory in terms closer to completing an endurance event, the kind of exhausted, disbelieving satisfaction you feel after something that tested you past what you thought you were capable of, not because the fight was unfair, because it was brutally hard in a way that was completely fair, completely earned, and appropriately apocalyptic. The mythology promised you a wolf that kills Odin. The game delivered exactly that. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more, click the video on the screen now.